Tonight we examine what makes a villain truly terrifying. We will walk through fog-covered streets and apartment corridors, study the design principles that create dread, and trace the evolution of one of horror gaming's most enigmatic figures. This is not a story about defeating evil. It's about understanding why some antagonists refuse to leave our minds long after the game ends. Pyramid Head exists in a category of his own, and by studying him, we learn what separates memorable horror from simple shock. And as always, if you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives and leave a comment telling us where in the world you are listening from. The architecture of fear. Horror antagonists follow patterns. The pursuer archetype appears across decades of games. The relentless figure who cannot be stopped, only survived. Resident Evil's Mr. X stalks the police station halls with methodical precision. Nemesis crashes through walls calling out the STARS team with single-minded purpose. Jack Baker stumbles through his Bayou mansion, alternating between folksy charm and explosive violence. These pursuers share fundamental traits. They move with purpose, often walking rather than sprinting, which creates a different kind of tension than a sudden jump scare. They demonstrate intelligence, opening doors, learning patrol routes, adapting to player behavior, but rarely speak in complete sentences. Their silence or limited vocabulary makes them feel less human, more like forces of nature. The player cannot negotiate with them, cannot reason with them. Running and hiding become the only options. Most importantly, these antagonists exist to make players feel powerless. For most of the game, bullets bounce off them or barely slow them down. Fire doesn't work. Explosives cause temporary staggers at best. The game teaches you through brutal repetition that fighting is futile. Your resources are better spent elsewhere. This powerlessness creates a specific emotional state, not panic, but a sustained, low-level dread that colors every decision. Do you risk crossing that hallway? Is there enough time to grab that item before he rounds the corner? The pattern typically resolves in a climactic boss fight. After hours of running, after mastering the game's systems and gathering powerful weapons, the player finally gets permission to fight back. These battles feel earned. They transform fear into catharsis. You thought you were weak, but you were actually growing stronger all along. The monster dies, the music swells, and the credits roll with a sense of victory. Pyramid Head breaks this pattern in almost every way. You never truly defeat him. There is no triumphant boss music, no satisfying final blow that makes him crumble. Instead, he destroys himself when his purpose is complete. The victory isn't about overpowering him, it's about outgrowing the need for what he represents. This fundamental difference reshapes everything else about his character. Where other pursuers exist as external threats, Pyramid Head manifests from internal psychology. Where others have backstories explaining their origins, Pyramid Head emerges from guilt and shame without requiring biographical justification. This distinction matters for anyone studying how to create memorable antagonists. The easiest path is making your villain physically imposing and relentless. Give them a weapon, make them unkillable, teach the player to run. That formula works. Games prove it repeatedly. But Pyramid Head demonstrates a more sophisticated approach. Make your villain a mirror. Let them reflect the protagonist's worst aspects back at them. Give them purpose that exists independently of simple murder. Create situations where the line between helpful and harmful blurs completely. The power of this approach becomes clear when examining each appearance in Silent Hill 2. Pyramid Head doesn't simply chase James through corridors. Each encounter serves a different narrative and psychological function, building toward an inevitable conclusion that transforms both characters. The game trains you to expect a traditional boss fight, then delivers something far more unsettling: the realization that you've been fighting yourself all along. First contact, the iron bars. The introduction happens on the second floor of Woodside Apartments. James explores a narrow hallway, his flashlight cutting through gloom that seems to absorb sound. The radio begins crackling, harsh, distorted static that makes your teeth ache. This audio cue has been reliable so far. It means something dangerous is close. Then you see him. Behind iron bars set into the wall, a figure stands in motionless silence. The red light gives everything a surgical quality, like an operating theater or a dark room where photographs develop. The creature wears a stained apron or smock, something that was once white, now marked with use. His arms hang at his sides completely still, and his head is encased in something that makes no biological sense: a massive triangular helmet of rusted iron that extends past his shoulders and covers his torso. This is not a mask. Masks imply something worn for concealment, something that can be removed. This helmet looks welded in place, permanent, part of his anatomy. The geometry is wrong for a human head. That triangular shape, like a steep roof or a blade seen straight on, contains angles that don't suggest any functional purpose. It's not armor protecting vulnerable areas. It's not ceremonial decoration meant to inspire fear in enemies. It simply is, without explanation, without concession to logic or biology. When Silent Hill 2 first released in 2001, players had no frame of reference for this design. The survival horror genre had established visual languages for its antagonists. Resident Evil gave us reanimated corpses and bioorganic weapons that followed clear evolutionary paths from human to monster. Silent Hill 1 presented creatures that were disturbing but still recognizable: dogs, children, nurses. Their designs emerged from familiar templates twisted by nightmare logic. Pyramid Head presents no such template. The helmet shape suggests nothing natural. The apron and exposed arms create a deliberate contrast: human limbs attached to an inhuman head. Standing behind those bars, not moving, not making sound, he becomes a question mark that the game refuses to answer immediately. You don't know what this is. The game doesn't tell you. It simply shows you, lets that image settle into your brain, and moves on. This introduction works because it does almost nothing. There's no chase, no attack, no immediate threat beyond presence. The bars keep you safe, which means you can study him. The game forces you to look, to absorb details, to begin forming theories about what you're seeing. Then, when you return to that hallway after exploring a side room, he's gone. The bars remain, but the space behind them is empty. This absence creates a different kind of fear than presence would. Now you know he can move. You know he was watching you, and then he made a decision. He chose to leave. Where did he go? Is he waiting around the next corner? Will those bars protect you next time? The game has taken a static image and animated it through absence, teaching you that Pyramid Head follows his own logic, his own timetable. He doesn't exist to jump scare you. He's patient. The effectiveness of this scene relies on withholding information. Traditional game design often feels obligated to explain immediately. Tutorial boxes pop up. This is the main antagonist. He cannot be killed. Run when you see him. Environmental storytelling might show you his silhouette chasing someone else, establishing his threat level through demonstration. But Silent Hill 2 gives you nothing except the visual. You're meant to be confused, unsettled, uncertain. That uncertainty amplifies when analyzing the design itself. Game designer Masahiro Ito, who created Pyramid Head's visual concept, has discussed in interviews how the shape emerged from multiple influences: religious imagery, industrial equipment, execution devices, all filtered through a desire to create something that felt aggressive through silhouette alone. That triangular mass points forward like a weapon. It suggests weight, something that would be nearly impossible to carry, which implies strength. The rust implies age, history, something that's been used before. But these are post-rationalization interpretations. In the moment standing in that hallway, you're not thinking about historical execution methods or design principles. You're simply experiencing wrongness. This thing should not exist. The fact that it does, that it's real within the game's logic, creates immediate questions that drive you forward through the story. You need to know what this is. You need to understand why it's here. The iron bars serve one more crucial function. They establish a pattern that the game will break later. Right now, you're safe. The environment protects you. But the message is clear. This protection is temporary. Those bars won't always be there. Sooner or later, you will meet this figure without barriers between you. The game sets up an expectation and a countdown clock without telling you when zero arrives. The mannequin room, violence without purpose. The second encounter happens in apartment 307. James opens the door to witness Pyramid Head hunched over two mannequin-type creatures on the floor. The animation is unmistakably violent and sexual, though rendered in a way that emphasizes horror over titillation. Neither Pyramid Head nor the mannequins possess functional anatomy for actual intercourse. These are monsters simulating human trauma without the biological capacity to complete it. This scene remains deeply controversial among players and critics. Some argue it's gratuitous, designed purely for shock value. Others see it as essential character development for both James and Pyramid Head. The truth exists somewhere between these positions, but the scene's purpose becomes clearer when examining what happens after the initial horror. James hides in a nearby closet. This is important. He doesn't run, doesn't try to leave the apartment. He stays and watches. Pyramid Head eventually notices James's presence and approaches the closet. In the original PlayStation 2 version, James fires his handgun multiple times. Pyramid Head reacts dramatically to the bullets, making pained movements before eventually wandering out of the room. In the 2024 remake, James still fires, but Pyramid Head barely reacts at all. He seems to notice the gunshots, processes this information, and then simply leaves through his characteristic glitching, stuttering walk cycle. The remake's version strengthens the characterization. Pyramid Head cannot be hurt, not really. Bullets are irrelevant. The reason he leaves has nothing to do with damage or pain. He leaves because his purpose in this moment is complete. He has demonstrated something, forced James to witness something, and now he's finished. The scene serves his inscrutable agenda, not James's survival instincts. So what exactly is being demonstrated here? The surface reading is obvious. Sexual violence as punishment, as expression of shame and lust James hasn't processed regarding his wife's long illness. During the years when Mary was sick, when physical intimacy became impossible, James likely experienced natural human desires that his circumstance transformed into sources of guilt. He wanted to be a good husband, a faithful caretaker, but human biology doesn't turn off because someone you love is suffering. These conflicting emotions, desire, guilt, shame, resentment, had nowhere healthy to go. In Silent Hill's otherworld, those unresolved emotions manifest as monsters. The mannequins themselves are overtly sexualized despite being inhuman constructions. They represent objectification, bodies without agency or personality. Pyramid Head attacking them becomes James's subconscious, acting out its own guilt, punishing these manifestations of lust through ritualized violence. But there's a second function to this scene that's equally important, establishing Pyramid Head's position in the monster hierarchy. Up until now, James has encountered various creatures that he can fight and kill. They're dangerous but manageable. Then Pyramid Head appears and attacks those same creatures, overpowering them effortlessly. The scene demonstrates apex predator status without needing a direct confrontation with James. This technique appears in other horror media to establish threat levels efficiently. When Ripley encounters the alien in the first film, we've already seen it kill multiple crew members. When the Terminator appears, his first action is murdering punks for their clothes. These scenes teach the audience this is the real threat without needing explicit exposition. Pyramid Head attacking other monsters serves the same function. It reframes everything you've fought so far as mere obstacles rather than true dangers. The sexual nature of the violence serves another purpose specific to Silent Hill 2's themes. This game is fundamentally about masculinity, guilt, and violence toward women. James killed his wife. That's the buried truth the entire game builds toward revealing. Everything in the other world exists to force James to confront this reality through metaphor and symbolism. Pyramid Head attacking feminine-coded monsters, the mannequins clearly read as female forms, becomes a mirror held up to James's own capacity for violence against women. James watches from the closet, hidden, voyeuristic. He's witnessing his own worst impulses made literal. The game could have placed him anywhere, but instead it puts him in a closet, contained, unable to act, forced to observe. This positioning matters. James isn't participating directly in the violence, but he can't escape it either. He's complicit through observation. This dynamic will repeat throughout the game, most notably in Maria's deaths, where James fails to protect her again and again. The scene ends with Pyramid Head leaving of his own volition. James didn't drive him away. The bullets were meaningless. Pyramid Head's departure happens because some internal logic has been satisfied, some purpose fulfilled that James and the player cannot yet understand. This creates a crucial dynamic that separates Pyramid Head from typical video game antagonists. In most games, the villain reacts to player actions. Shoot them, they flinch. Run, they chase. Hide, they search. The interaction creates a gameplay loop where player agency drives encounter design. But Pyramid Head operates independently. He appears when the story, or more accurately, James's psyche, requires him, and he leaves when that need is satisfied. You cannot control these encounters through skill or strategy. You can only survive them and wonder what they mean. This loss of player control is fundamental to effective horror. Fear emerges from vulnerability, and vulnerability requires situations where your inputs don't guarantee outcomes. The most frightening moments in games happen when normal rules stop applying, when your tools and abilities suddenly prove insufficient. Pyramid Head embodies this principle. His appearances strip away the power fantasy that most games provide, leaving James and the player helpless before a force that cannot be reasoned with or defeated. The stairwell, claustrophobia, and survival. The third encounter forces direct confrontation in the most hostile environment possible. In the original PlayStation 2 version, James finds himself trapped in a narrow concrete stairwell with Pyramid Head. There's barely room for two people, let alone one person, and a massive creature wielding an oversized blade. The camera angles compound the claustrophobia, pulling in close, limiting sight lines. You can't see around corners. You can't maintain distance. Every backward step brings James closer to a wall that will pin him in place. The 2024 remake changes the location to the Otherworld apartments, specifically a waterlogged room with grating floors and maze-like geometry. This change serves the remake's updated combat system, which emphasizes mobility and dynamic movement. The original's clunky tank controls worked in tight spaces because awkwardness was part of the design philosophy. The remake's over-the-shoulder camera and responsive movement would trivialize a narrow stairwell encounter, so the developers expanded the arena while maintaining oppressive atmosphere through lighting, sound design, and the ever-present threat of Pyramid Head's weapon sweeps. Regardless of version, the core function remains identical. James must survive an extended encounter with Pyramid Head in close quarters with no escape route. The game tells you explicitly through a loading screen hint or tutorial message that bullets will not kill this enemy. Your only job is to last long enough for something to change. That something arrives as a distant siren, the same air raid siren that signals otherworld transitions throughout the game. Pyramid Head stops attacking mid-swing, turns away from James, and walks toward the sound as if summoned by something more important than murder. This scene establishes several crucial facts about Pyramid Head's nature and purpose. First, he is not trying to kill James. If killing were the objective, he could accomplish it easily. James is trapped, wounded, low on resources. Pyramid Head is unkillable and wields a weapon that could cleave James in two with a single solid hit. The encounter drags on specifically because Pyramid Head isn't committing fully to murder. Second, something controls or summons him beyond James's presence. The siren calls and he obeys. This implies a hierarchy, a logic system operating behind the scenes. Pyramid Head may be a manifestation of James's guilt, but he doesn't take orders from James. He responds to the other world itself, to whatever mechanisms govern when manifestations appear and disappear. This distinction matters because it prevents Pyramid Head from feeling like a simple boss monster. He has agency, purpose, patterns that exist independently of the player. Third, the encounter is designed to inflict psychological rather than physical defeat. Yes, James takes damage during the fight. Yes, players will likely use healing items and ammunition trying to survive, but the real impact is emotional. You've been taught that guns solve problems in video games. You've been shown that careful resource management and skilled play lead to victory. Then Pyramid Head appears and strips all that away. Your skills are meaningless. Your resources are wasted. You can only survive because he allows you to survive. This dynamic creates what could be called managed helplessness. James is powerless, but not so powerless that the encounter becomes a cut scene. You still control him, still make decisions about when to shoot, when to heal, how to position yourself. These actions have tactical value in extending survival time, but they don't change the fundamental equation. Pyramid Head will stop attacking when the siren sounds, not when you've dealt enough damage. Your victory isn't earned through skill, it's granted through narrative timing. This managed helplessness appears in other horror classics to great effect. In Resident Evil 3, Nemesis pursues Jill through Raccoon City, appearing at scripted moments that feel organic. You can knock him down temporarily, creating breathing room, but he always returns. The game teaches you that true victory isn't defeating Nemesis. It's reaching the next safe room, the next checkpoint. Your goal is escape, not domination. But Nemesis and Pyramid Head differ in one crucial way. Nemesis will kill you if he catches you. Game over, reload from save. Pyramid Head won't. The stairwell fight can theoretically go on forever if you keep healing. Eventually, the siren sounds regardless of whether you're at full health or near death. This removes even the concrete failure state that other pursuers provide. You can't actually lose this encounter. You can only endure it. Why does Pyramid Head stop? Why doesn't he finish the job? The answer lies in understanding his true purpose. He exists to punish James, to force him to experience fear and pain and helplessness as penance for what James did to Mary. But punishment requires the punished party to be alive. Death would be mercy, release from guilt. So Pyramid Head inflicts suffering precisely calculated to damage without destroying. He chases just long enough to terrify, then withdraws before delivering a killing blow. This makes him more cruel than a simple monster trying to kill you. A mindless predator follows instinct, hunger, territoriality, reproduction. You can understand and predict animal behavior, but Pyramid Head's restraint implies consciousness, decision-making, intentionality. He chooses to let James live. He chooses to prolong the torture. This transforms him from natural threat to something far more disturbing, a torturer who understands exactly what he's doing. The original game's stairwell setting emphasized this through pure claustrophobia. No room to maneuver, no options beyond accepting damage and hoping for the siren. The remake's waterlogged apartment maze adds a different flavor of helplessness. You can run, but the space is still enclosed, still hostile, still designed to make you feel cornered despite having technically more room to move. Both versions understand that the physical space matters less than the psychological space. The encounter needs to feel inescapable, even if escape routes technically exist. After the scene, James is thoroughly trained. He knows Pyramid Head cannot be fought. He knows running is futile. He knows that encounters end when Pyramid Head decides they end, not through player agency. This training will shape how James responds in all future encounters. He's learned helplessness in the most literal sense, through repeated demonstration that his actions don't control outcomes. Brookhaven Hospital, Helpful Harm. Pyramid Head makes 2 appearances in Brookhaven Hospital, and both fundamentally alter his role in James's journey. The first happens on the hospital roof. James explores a small outdoor area, metal grating, chain link fencing, the sound of wind and distant sirens. He enters a side room, examines documents or items. Standard survival horror exploration beats. Then he exits, and Pyramid Head is standing directly in front of him. No warning, no build-up. The radio didn't crackle. He simply manifested while James's back was turned. This violation of established rules creates profound unease. The radio has been reliable throughout the game as an early warning system. Its failure here suggests Pyramid Head operates outside normal monster logic. Before James can react, Pyramid Head seizes him by the throat and hurls him downward through a rusted section of flooring. James falls, crashes through the ceiling of a room below, and lands hard. The camera settles. James stands, bruised but functional, and as the player regains control, they realize something important. This fall, this violence was necessary for progression. The room James lands in was previously inaccessible. No doors led here. No visible path connected it to the main route, but it contains items and clues essential for completing the hospital's puzzles and eventually escaping the building. Pyramid Head, through his violence, has literally thrown James forward in his journey. The attack that should have been deadly instead becomes aid. This scene inverts the established relationship between protagonist and antagonist. Video game villains exist to impede progress. They block paths, create obstacles, force the player to expend resources defeating or bypassing them. Pyramid Head attacks James, but the result is progression rather than setback. He removes a barrier that the game design had placed in James's way. What does this mean narratively? It suggests that despite the fear and pain Pyramid Head inflicts, his ultimate function isn't destructive. He's forcing James to confront truth through violent means. Yes, but confrontation is necessary. James needs to face his guilt. He needs to acknowledge what he's done. Left to his own devices, James would avoid these revelations. Pyramid Head denies him that option. Each encounter strips away another layer of denial and self-deception. This reading transforms Pyramid Head from purely malevolent force to something more ambiguous. Still terrifying, still dangerous, but serving a therapeutic purpose, even if therapy manifests as trauma. He's surgery without anesthesia, necessary agony that leads to healing. The game never states this explicitly. There's no moment where James says, "I understand now that Pyramid Head was helping me." The interpretation emerges through careful attention to what actually happens in each encounter versus what feels like it should happen. The second hospital appearance occurs in the basement, and it's Pyramid Head's most actively predatory sequence. James and Maria have been separated and then reunited. She was dead, murdered during their last encounter, but now she's alive again, perfectly healthy, with only vague memories of what happened. They move together through the nightmare basement, long corridors that stretch farther than the building's exterior dimensions could possibly allow. Then Pyramid Head emerges from behind them. The camera pulls back, showing him at the far end of the hallway. He begins walking toward them, not running, not teleporting, just walking, steady and inevitable, his massive blade dragging along the floor with a metallic scrape that cuts through every other sound. The chase sequence begins. This is pure adrenaline horror. The player must navigate James through corridor turns, unlock doors, solve minor environmental puzzles, all while Pyramid Head approaches at his steady walk. The genius of this scene lies in the pacing. Because he doesn't run, because he maintains that measured pace, the terror becomes sustainable rather than explosive. There's time to think, to make mistakes, to feel James's desperation building as the distance closes. The sequence culminates at an elevator. James reaches it first and frantically hits the button. The doors begin closing. Maria arrives a second later, exhausted, calling out to James, and Pyramid Head arrives half a second after that. The doors are closing. Maria is on the wrong side. Pyramid Head raises his weapon. The blade punches through Maria's body. She gasps. Blood spreads across her outfit. Her eyes fix on James's. The doors seal shut. James stands alone in the rising elevator, while Maria's corpse lies on the basement floor. This sequence does several things simultaneously. First, it delivers a genuinely frightening chase scene that relies on design fundamentals: limited visibility, tight corridors, relentless pursuit, time pressure, scripted near misses that calibrate tension. Second, it demonstrates again that Pyramid Head's primary target isn't James. He could have attacked James at any point during that chase. He could have killed James first and then dealt with Maria. Instead, he ignores James entirely to murder Maria specifically. Third, and most importantly, it inflicts psychological damage far worse than physical injury. Maria represents James's fantasy. Mary without the illness, sexuality without guilt, companionship without obligation. She's what James wishes Mary could have been during those long years of sickness. Pyramid Head killing Maria forces James to lose that fantasy version while helplessly watching, recreating the emotional dynamic of watching Mary die slowly from illness. James cannot save her. His presence is worthless. His resources, his weapons, his determination, none of it matters. The scene would be tragic for Maria regardless, but she functions in the story primarily as a tool for James's character development. She dies repeatedly not for her own narrative arc, but to traumatize James into confronting his guilt. This utilitarian treatment of Maria as a character has sparked significant critical discussion about the game's gender politics. She's fridged, killed repeatedly to motivate the male protagonist's emotional journey. The game is aware of this pattern and eventually subverts it in meaningful ways, but in the moment Maria suffers and dies to service James's growth. From Pyramid Head's perspective, killing Maria serves his function perfectly. He exists to punish James, and the most effective punishment available is forcing James to relive his worst failure. Each time Maria dies, James experiences anew the helplessness of watching someone he cares about suffer while being unable to help. This repetition is the point. Trauma solidifies through repetition. Guilt intensifies through repeated failure. After Maria's death, James's emotional state deteriorates significantly. The game's dialogue becomes more fragmented. Environmental design grows more abstract and nightmare-like. The connection between physical location and emotional state, which has always been present in Silent Hill, becomes overt and undeniable. James is descending into the deepest levels of the other world because he's descending into the deepest levels of his own guilt and self-hatred. The historical society, origins, and truth. Between the hospital and prison segments, James briefly visits the Silent Hill Historical Society, a small museum dedicated to the town's history. The building is quiet, dusty, lit by ambient daylight filtering through grimy windows. Display cases hold artifacts, photos, and documents chronicling decades of local events. One wall features several paintings depicting important moments in Silent Hill's past. One painting stands out. Its label reads, "Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment." The image shows a group of figures in executioner's garb, heavy aprons, crude leather straps, and most notably, massive triangular iron helmets. They hold long spears and stand over bodies suspended upside down in iron cages. The painting is rendered in a primitive style, more folk art than refined technique, which gives it an unsettling documentary quality. This was real, the painting suggests. This happened here. This painting provides Pyramid Head's historical context. At some point in Silent Hill's past, executioners in the town wore those distinctive helmets while carrying out death sentences. The design wasn't random or symbolic. It was practical equipment used by real people performing real executions. When James encounters Pyramid Head in the other world, he's encountering a manifestation that draws from the town's violent history. This revelation operates on two possible levels. First possibility, James saw this painting during his vacation with Mary 3 years ago. The image stuck in his subconscious and later manifested in the other world as a symbol of punishment. This reading makes Pyramid Head primarily James's creation, sourced from his memories. Second possibility, James never saw the painting. He knows nothing about Silent Hill's history. When the other world manifested Pyramid Head, it drew from the town's collective unconscious rather than James's personal memories. This reading suggests the other world has access to historical information independent of individual characters. It can manifest figures from the town's past without requiring the current occupant to have prior knowledge of them. The game doesn't confirm either reading. Both remain valid interpretations. What matters is that Pyramid Head has roots in actual history, or at least the game's fictional version of history. He's not something James conjured from nowhere. He's an echo, a revival, a thing that existed once and has been pulled back into existence by Silent Hill's supernatural power. This grounding in history affects how Pyramid Head functions symbolically. He's not just James's guilt personified, he's the town's history of violence and judgment made manifest. Silent Hill has always been a place where terrible things happened. The other world doesn't create this violence. It reveals and amplifies what was always present. Pyramid Head embodies centuries of execution, punishment, and death, all focused through the lens of James's specific guilt. The painting also establishes that the triangular helmet design served a real purpose for actual executioners. What might that purpose have been? Several theories emerge from analyzing the shape and material. The heavy iron construction would make the helmet extremely uncomfortable to wear for extended periods. This discomfort might have been intentional, making the role of executioner physically punishing as well as psychologically demanding. The weight would require significant strength to bear, selecting for physically capable individuals. The triangular shape creates several practical effects. It limits peripheral vision severely. The executioner would have a narrow forward view and almost no side awareness. This forced focus might have been considered beneficial, preventing the executioner from seeing the crowd, reducing opportunities for hesitation or emotional connection with witnesses. The shape also dehumanizes the wearer. Anyone seeing this helmet would struggle to perceive the person underneath as human. They become a tool, an instrument of death, rather than a person making moral choices. The helmet's size extends past the shoulders and covers much of the torso, creating a silhouette that appears broader and more imposing than a human form. This amplification of physical presence might have served to intimidate, to make the executioner appear more powerful and inevitable. Combined with the heavy apron and long spear shown in the painting, the entire ensemble transforms a human being into an avatar of institutional violence. When Pyramid Head appears in the other world, he inherits all these implications. He's not just wearing a helmet, he's become the helmet. The human elements underneath are irrelevant. He is punishment made flesh, judgment given form, violence transformed from abstract concept to walking presence. The historical executioners wore the helmet to perform their duties. Pyramid Head is the helmet, performing duties that extend beyond simple execution into psychological torture. This historical context explains why Pyramid Head never speaks. The executioners in the painting appear as silent figures. Speech would humanize them, create opportunity for sympathy or negotiation. Silence maintains the mechanical quality of their role. They are not people who might be reasoned with, they are processes being carried out. Pyramid Head maintains this silence throughout the game. He never speaks to James, never tries to communicate, never explains his actions. He simply executes his function without needing language. The painting's discovery changes how players retrospectively view earlier encounters. Pyramid Head wasn't random nightmare imagery. He was the town reaching into its own history to find an appropriate symbol for what James needed to face. This grounds the surrealism in concrete reality, making the other world feel more like a real place with real rules rather than arbitrary dream logic. The labyrinth becoming the executioner. After the historical society and the prison, James descends into the labyrinth, a space that no longer pretends to be a real location. The corridors twist impossibly. Rooms connect in ways that violate physical geometry. The monster design becomes more abstract, less tethered to recognizable forms. This is the deepest layer of the other world, the place where James's psyche manifests most directly without compromise or metaphor. Pyramid Head appears here as well, wandering the corridors as one more obstacle. In the original PlayStation 2 version, His appearances function as environmental hazards. You hear him before seeing him, giving time to hide or take alternate routes. The labyrinth is already maze-like. Adding a roaming executioner who kills on contact transforms navigation into a stealth challenge. The 2024 remake expands this into a more active sequence. James must push through a wall of glitching, writhing bodies while Pyramid Head pursues from behind. The bodies reach out, grab, slow progress. The space is narrow. Pyramid Head's blade swings fill the corridor. The sequence combines chase mechanics with environmental puzzle solving under time pressure. Both versions include one crucial element. Pyramid Head's weapon becomes available to James. The massive blade that Pyramid Head drags through every encounter can be found embedded in the labyrinth floor. In the original, it exists as a weapon James can equip and wield in combat. It's absurdly heavy, incredibly slow, covers the entire screen, and is generally useless in practical combat situations. It's a novelty, a joke almost. Here's Pyramid Head's signature weapon. Now you can use it and discover why swinging a blade the size of a door is a bad idea. The remake transforms this from novelty to necessity. The blade is too heavy for combat, but James can use it to carve through the wall of bodies blocking his path forward. He struggles under the weight, movements slow and labored, but the blade cuts through obstacles that nothing else can penetrate. To progress, James must literally become Pyramid Head, wielding the executioner's weapon to force his way through the nightmare. This moment carries profound symbolic weight. Throughout the game, Pyramid Head has been something external, something attacking James from outside. Here the game collapses that distinction. James takes up the executioner's blade. He becomes the one pushing forward through violence. The separation between victim and executioner dissolves. This is how the game communicates a truth that James isn't quite ready to consciously acknowledge. He is Pyramid Head. More accurately, Pyramid Head is him. The executioner isn't some external force inflicting punishment. It's James's own guilt and self-hatred manifested as a separate being. Every time Pyramid Head attacked, every time he killed Maria, he was acting out James's subconscious desire for punishment and his fear of his own capacity for violence. By making James wield the blade, the game forces this recognition without stating it explicitly. The player feels the weight of the weapon, struggles with its unwieldiness, watches James barely able to carry what Pyramid Head wields effortlessly. The message is clear. Pyramid Head is what James would become if all restraint disappeared, if guilt and violence were the only things left. He's James without humanity, James reduced to punishment and judgment. The wall of bodies that James must cut through represents his various justifications, denials, and deflections. These psychological barriers have kept him from acknowledging the truth. Now, wielding the executioner's blade, he carves through them by force. The violence is necessary. The metaphor is unsubtle. James cannot reach the truth through gentle self-examination. He must violently tear down his own psychological defenses. This scene also completes Pyramid Head's characterization as a reflection of James specifically. Other characters in Silent Hill 2 have their own other worlds, their own manifestations. Angela sees burning buildings and flesh-covered walls. Eddie sees frozen meat lockers and mocking faces. James sees Pyramid Head because his specific trauma, his specific guilt, requires an executioner figure. The town gives each person what they need, whether they want it or not. After claiming the blade and pushing through the bodies, James reaches Maria once again. She's trapped behind bars, calling out to him, begging for help. This repetition of her imprisonment and eventual death is reaching its breaking point. James is tired, Maria is tired, the player is tired. The game has thoroughly established the pattern. Maria will die again. Pyramid Head will kill her. James will be unable to stop it. The cycle continues because James hasn't learned what the cycle is trying to teach him. Final confrontation, destroying the executioner. The endgame begins at Lakeview Hotel. James wanders the guest floors, finding pieces of his suppressed memories. A videotape waits in the hotel safe. When James plays it, he watches himself suffocate Mary with a pillow. The truth is finally undeniable. Not illness, not accident, murder. James killed his wife because he couldn't bear the burden of caring for her anymore, because resentment and exhaustion overcame love, because at some point during those long years, the part of him that wanted her to die became stronger than the part that wanted her to live. This revelation breaks what remains of James's psychological defenses. The hotel transforms. The polished wood and clean carpet give way to rust and rot. James descends stairs that spiral far below ground level, passing through spaces that couldn't possibly exist under the building. He follows Maria's voice, or is it Mary's voice, deeper into the nightmare until he reaches a final room. Maria hangs upside down in the center of the space, suspended in an iron cage. She's struggling, gasping, calling to James for help, and standing in the room with her are two pyramid heads. This doubling is significant. Throughout the game, Pyramid Head appeared as a singular figure. One executioner was sufficient for the punishment James required. But now, as James finally acknowledges his guilt, as the truth becomes conscious rather than suppressed, his psyche requires more intense judgment. Two executioners stand ready to deliver it. They move toward Maria with mechanical precision. No hesitation. No interest in James at all despite his presence. Maria screams. James shouts at them to stop, to leave her alone. They ignore him completely. Their spears punch through her body. She convulses. Blood spreads. She dies again, more brutally than any previous death. James collapses to his knees. The weight of repeated failure crashes down. He has watched Maria die multiple times. He has been unable to protect her, unable to stop Pyramid Head, unable to change anything. In this moment, the game distills James' entire journey into one emotion: helplessness. He is powerless before forces he cannot fight. But then something changes. James stops screaming. The panic drains from his posture. He stands slowly, and when he speaks, his voice is calm, resolved. I know what you are. I know why I needed you. But it's all over now. I don't need you anymore. This statement represents full acknowledgement. James understands that Pyramid Head is a manifestation of his guilt, that the executioners exist because he believed he deserved punishment. More importantly, he understands that he doesn't need them anymore. Not because his guilt has disappeared. He still killed Mary, that truth hasn't changed, but because he's ready to consciously carry that guilt instead of externalizing it into monster form. The pyramid heads stop moving. They stand motionless for a moment. Then, in unison, they turn their spears on themselves. The blades pierce their own bodies. They sink to the ground and die. This suicide is unprecedented in video game villain design. Antagonists don't kill themselves when the protagonist reaches an epiphany. They fight harder, transform into more powerful forms, force a climactic battle. But Pyramid Head has no interest in traditional boss battle structure. He exists to serve a purpose. When that purpose is complete, he disappears. This ending subverts every expectation the game has carefully built. You've been trained to expect a boss fight. The music swells appropriately. Two enemies appear instead of one, suggesting increased difficulty. The arena is large and open, perfect for combat. All the pieces are in place for a traditional final confrontation. Then the game pulls the rug out. Victory comes not through combat but through understanding. The battle is won by refusing to fight. This refusal to fight is James's true growth. Throughout the game, he's fought monsters with guns and melee weapons. He's learned that violence can solve immediate problems. A monster dies, a path opens. But Pyramid Head demonstrated repeatedly that violence against him was meaningless. Bullets bounced off. The best weapons barely slowed him. The lesson was clear. This problem cannot be solved through violence. So James solves it through acceptance. He stops running from his guilt, stops trying to fight it or deny it. He acknowledges what he did and accepts that he must carry that weight. This acceptance makes the executioner unnecessary. Punishment serves no purpose once the condemned party fully acknowledges their crime. The trial is over. The verdict is in. Pyramid Head's role is complete. The two executioners falling simultaneously emphasizes the finality of this moment. One Pyramid Head could conceivably return, could find some lingering thread of denial to justify continued pursuit, but both executioners dying together represents total resolution. James's guilt will remain, but its manifestation as external pursuer can no longer exist. After their death, the room changes. The bars fall away. A door opens that was previously locked. James moves forward into the final chapter of the game, which plays out differently depending on which ending the player has earned through their actions. But regardless of specific ending, James has passed the point of no return. He cannot unknow what he's learned. Pyramid Head cannot return because the psychological need that created him has been resolved. This permanent defeat of the antagonist through character growth rather than combat prowess demonstrates sophisticated narrative design. Most games treat personal growth and combat prowess as the same thing. You become stronger by leveling up, gaining better weapons, learning new skills. Silent Hill 2 divorces these concepts. James doesn't defeat Pyramid Head by getting stronger. He defeats Pyramid Head by changing as a person, by achieving psychological growth that the combat system cannot measure or affect. Design philosophy, creating fear through restriction. Understanding why Pyramid Head works requires examining the design principles that shaped him. Masahiro Ito, the designer responsible for Pyramid Head's visual conception, has discussed in various interviews and social media posts how the character emerged from overlapping influences and intentional restrictions. The helmet design came from attempting to create something that looked inherently aggressive from any angle. Traditional monster design often relies on teeth, claws, and other obviously dangerous biological features. Ito wanted something that threatened through silhouette alone. The triangular shape points forward like a weapon. Its mass suggests weight, implying the strength needed to carry such a burden. The rust indicates age and history, suggesting this design has persisted because it works. Ito has also discussed how PlayStation 2 hardware limitations influence the design. The helmet completely obscures the face, eliminating the need for facial animations or expressions that would require additional processing power and development time. The simple geometric shape renders efficiently. The texturing, rust, stains, scrapes adds visual interest without requiring complex modeling. These practical considerations shape the final design as much as artistic vision. The weapon underwent similar evolutionary process. Initially conceived as an oversized knife, it transformed during development into something even more impractical, a massive blade that Pyramid Head must drag rather than carry. This dragging became crucial to his characterization. The scraping sound of metal on concrete announces his presence before he appears on screen. The visual of that enormous blade, gouging lines in the floor, emphasizes his strength. The impracticality makes him feel more alien, more divorced from human limitations. The glitching walk cycle was partially technical compromise, partially artistic choice. The PlayStation 2's animation system had limitations, and memory constraints meant that character animations needed to be efficient. The stuttering, glitching quality of Pyramid Head's movement emerged from these restrictions, but proved so effective at creating unease that it became a defining characteristic. He moves like something not quite real, like a video game character experiencing technical failure, which ironically makes him feel more genuinely wrong and unsettling. The decision to make him silent came from recognizing that dialogue would humanize him. Speech creates personality. Personality creates sympathy and understanding. For Pyramid Head to remain purely threatening, purely other, he needed to operate without language. His silence transforms him into a blank slate onto which players project their own fears and interpretations. You cannot predict his behavior through dialogue cues. You cannot understand his motivations through exposition. He simply acts, and you must respond without the benefit of communication. These design choices reflect a broader philosophy about effective horror antagonists. Fear emerges from the unknown, from things that violate expectations, from situations where normal rules stop applying. Pyramid Head violates countless expectations. He attacks other monsters instead of only the player. He cannot be permanently defeated through combat. He sometimes helps progress despite being the antagonist. He dies through the protagonist's emotional growth rather than damage accumulation. Each violation reinforces that this character operates on different logic than traditional game enemies. The comparison to pursuers like Nemesis or Mr. X highlights these differences. Nemesis is terrifying because he chases you relentlessly through Raccoon City, appearing at unexpected moments to force improvised escape. But Nemesis follows understandable rules. He takes damage, gets stunned, eventually dies. He can be predicted and countered through skill. His AI has patterns that careful players can learn and exploit. Pyramid Head offers no such learnable patterns. His appearances are scripted, not AI driven, which means players cannot manipulate his behavior through skill. This removes player agency, which horror games normally avoid because agency is empowering and empowerment fights against fear. But Silent Hill 2 embraces this disempowerment. The game intentionally makes you feel helpless because James is helpless before his own guilt. The mechanics reflect the narrative. This design philosophy extends to enemy encounters generally in Silent Hill 2. Combat is deliberately clunky and unsatisfying. James swings his weapon slowly. The camera makes targeting difficult. Enemies absorb damage in ways that feel spongy and unrewarding. These apparent design flaws are intentional. The game wants combat to feel bad because James is not a fighter. Combat is not the solution to his problems, and violence only ever makes things worse. Pyramid Head embodies this philosophy most completely. He is the enemy you absolutely cannot defeat through combat, teaching you that fighting isn't always the answer. Cultural impact and misinterpretation. Pyramid Head's popularity exploded after Silent Hill 2's release. The distinctive silhouette became instantly recognizable. Cosplayers at conventions wore handmade helmets and dragged replica swords. Fan art proliferated across early internet communities. Pyramid Head transcended Silent Hill 2 to become one of gaming's most iconic villains, standing alongside characters who achieved cultural recognition beyond their source material. This popularity led to his appearance in subsequent Silent Hill media, which often misunderstood what made him effective. In Silent Hill Homecoming, Pyramid Head appears as a generic monster enemy. Multiple Pyramid Heads patrol the town and can be fought using standard combat. This completely undermines his original function. He's no longer a manifestation of one person's specific guilt. He's just a scary-looking enemy type that the town produces for unclear reasons. The Silent Hill films similarly misuse him. In the first movie, Pyramid Head appears as a representative of the town's evil cult, executing victims in a church. In the sequel, he's basically a summoned guardian that the protagonist can direct against enemies. Both interpretations strip away the psychological complexity. He becomes a monster in the service of evil humans rather than a manifestation of human psychology. The helmet becomes a costume worn by cult members rather than an integral part of his being. Even in Silent Hill 2 itself, some players misinterpret Pyramid Head as a traditional villain, an evil entity that exists independently and must be defeated through combat. This reading is understandable given video game conventions, but it misses the core of his characterization. The game drops enough hints that careful players can piece together his true nature, but it never states explicitly, Pyramid Head is James's guilt manifested. This ambiguity leaves room for misinterpretation. The sexual violence in the mannequin scene contributed to controversial interpretations of his character as representing toxic masculinity or rape culture. These readings have merit. The scene is deliberately uncomfortable and ties into Silent Hill 2's broader themes about masculinity, violence, and relationships. But reducing Pyramid Head to rape monster oversimplifies his function. He represents multiple aspects of James's psychology simultaneously: guilt, desire for punishment, violent impulses, sexual shame, fear of inadequacy. The mannequin scene is one expression of these themes, not the totality of his character. His popularity created a feedback loop where subsequent Team Silent games felt pressure to create the next Pyramid Head, a signature, iconic monster that could anchor marketing. This pressure resulted in diminishing returns. The designers created interesting monsters like the Patient Demon in Silent Hill 4, but none achieved Pyramid Head's cultural penetration. The problem was attempting to replicate success rather than letting monsters emerge organically from each game's specific themes and protagonist psychology. What makes Pyramid Head special cannot be extracted and reused in other contexts. He works specifically for James's story, in James's version of the other world, addressing James's guilt. Transplanting him into other games, films, or media inevitably diminishes him because the specific context that gives him meaning is lost. A truly effective Silent Hill game would create its own unique manifestation that serves its protagonist's psychology, not recycle Pyramid Head because he's recognizable. The merchandising further dilutes his impact. Pyramid Head action figures, posters, and artwork reduce him to aesthetic symbol rather than narrative function. He becomes the scary guy with the triangle head, divorced from the emotional weight of Maria's repeated deaths, or James's journey toward accepting his guilt. This commodification is inevitable when a character becomes iconic, but it represents a form of cultural flattening where meaning gives way to recognition. Despite these misinterpretations and dilutions, Pyramid Head's core design remains influential. He established that video game antagonists could function on purely symbolic levels, that they could be defeated through emotional growth rather than combat, that their presence could serve the protagonist's character development rather than existing as obstacles to overcome. Every subsequent game that features an unkillable pursuer who represents the protagonist's trauma owes something to Silent Hill 2's approach. The key lesson for designers creating horror antagonists is that restriction and ambiguity create fear more effectively than elaboration and explanation. Pyramid Head works because players don't fully understand him. He violates expectations without clearly explaining why. He operates on dream logic that feels consistent within the game's rules, but never becomes fully predictable. Future horror games that understand this principle, that mystery and restriction trump explanation and power, will create more effective scares than those that rely on shock value and spectacle. Comparative analysis, pursuers across horror gaming. To fully appreciate Pyramid Head's uniqueness, examining how other horror games handle pursuer antagonists clarifies what Silent Hill 2 does differently. The pursuer archetype appears across 3 decades of horror gaming, evolving alongside technology and design philosophy. Early examples like the Alien and Alien Isolation established the baseline. The alien cannot be killed, only temporarily deterred. It learns from player behavior, adapting its patrol patterns based on what tools you use and where you hide. This creates genuine tension because the safe strategies that worked 10 minutes ago might fail now. The game deliberately makes the alien feel intelligent and unpredictable, forcing players to stay alert. But the alien exists independently of protagonist Amanda Ripley's psychology. It's a creature trying to kill her for biological reasons, territorial defense, hunting behavior, species preservation. The game could swap Amanda for any other character, and the alien's behavior would remain identical. Its presence serves gameplay tension rather than narrative symbolism. Resident Evil 2's Mr. X represents a transitional approach. He's a bioweapon programmed to eliminate survivors in the police station, following orders and mission parameters. His heavy footsteps echo through the building, creating dread every time you hear that distinctive thud, thud, thud approaching. He cannot be killed, only temporarily knocked down, forcing players to manage their routes carefully and decide when to engage versus when to flee. Mr. X's appearance is striking. Massive trench coat and fedora, inhuman height, blank expression. But this costume choice is arbitrary rather than meaningful. He wears a trench coat because Umbrella Corporation equipped him with one, presumably for infiltration purposes, not because the outfit reflects protagonist Leon Kennedy's psychological state. His presence creates gameplay pressure. The safe room is no longer safe if he's patrolling outside, but doesn't illuminate anything about Leon's character. Resident Evil 7's Jack Baker comes closer to psychological integration. Jack pursues Ethan Winters through the Baker family mansion, smashing through walls, laughing maniacally, delivering monologues about family and respect. Unlike most pursuers, Jack speaks constantly, creating personality. He's terrifying not just because he's unkillable, but because he's a distorted parody of fatherhood, the dad who insists on family dinner becoming the dad who won't let you leave the table alive. Jack's characterization serves the game's themes about family dysfunction and cult indoctrination. His pursuit represents Ethan's fear of being absorbed into this toxic family structure, of losing his identity to the Baker's madness. When Jack eventually dies in a boss fight, it feels earned because Ethan has grown strong enough to resist the Baker's influence. The victory is both physical and psychological, but Jack still exists as a separate character with his own backstory, motivations, and agency. He was a real person before Eveline's mold infection. He makes decisions independent of Ethan's presence. His goal, forcing Ethan to join the family, drives his behavior rather than simply manifesting from Ethan's psyche. He's a step towards psychological integration but remains fundamentally external. The closest comparison to Pyramid Head appears in lesser-known horror titles that experiment with psychological antagonists. In Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, the voices and manifestations Senua encounters emerge from her psychosis, representing her trauma and fractured mental state. Defeating enemies doesn't solve her problems. Managing her condition is the only sustainable victory. But Hellblade is more psychological drama than horror game, and its combat-focused enemies don't achieve the same iconic status as Pyramid Head. What distinguishes Pyramid Head from all these examples is that he exists solely to serve James's character arc. Remove James from Silent Hill 2, and Pyramid Head cannot exist. He has no goals beyond forcing James to confront his guilt. He doesn't pursue James to kill him, to absorb him into something, to complete mission parameters. He pursues James to make James feel specific emotions, fear, helplessness, guilt, until James grows enough to no longer need that punishment. This makes Pyramid Head paradoxically selfless despite his violence. He's not acting in his own interest because he has no interests. He's pure function, pure purpose. Other pursuers want something: food, territory, obedience, completion of programming. Pyramid Head wants nothing except to fulfill the role James's psyche assigned him. When that role is complete, he vanishes without resistance. The horror game landscape has room for both approaches. External pursuers like the Alien or Mr. X create moment-to-moment gameplay tension that keeps players engaged and alert. Psychological manifestations like Pyramid Head create emotional and intellectual engagement that persists after the game ends. The ideal pursuer might balance both: an antagonist that threatens mechanically while also serving symbolic narrative function. Modern horror games increasingly attempt this balance. The Baker family and RE7 are both legitimate external threats and symbolic representations of family dysfunction. The demons in Senua's Sacrifice are both combat challenges and manifestations of mental illness. But few achieve the complete integration Silent Hill 2 managed, where the antagonist cannot exist separately from the protagonist's psychology. Lessons for creating memorable antagonists. What can writers, designers, and creators learn from Pyramid Head's construction? Several principles emerge from analyzing what makes him effective. First, restriction creates fear more effectively than elaboration. Pyramid Head never speaks, never removes his helmet, never explains his actions. This silence forces players to interpret behavior without guidance. The uncertainty amplifies dread because you cannot predict what you don't understand. Many creators instinctively want to explain their antagonists, provide backstory, motivation, clear rules. But mystery often serves horror better than clarity. Second, violate established patterns strategically. Pyramid Head attacking other monsters instead of the player. Pyramid Head helping progression through violence. Pyramid Head killing himself. Each violation of expected behavior makes him feel more alien and threatening. But these violations aren't random. Each serves a purpose in his characterization and James's journey. Strategic rule-breaking feels intentional. Arbitrary rule-breaking feels like bad design. Third, make the antagonist serve the protagonist's arc. Pyramid Head exists to force James to confront his guilt. Every appearance advances this goal. He's not a separate character with independent goals that happen to conflict with the protagonist. He's purely functional, existing only to facilitate James's growth. This complete subordination to narrative purpose makes him more effective as a story element, even if it limits his appeal as a standalone character. Fourth, consider how player agency interacts with fear. Giving players control usually reduces fear because control is empowering, but sometimes removing control creates more impactful horror. Pyramid Head encounters remove player agency deliberately. You cannot fight effectively, cannot escape until he allows it, cannot change outcomes through skill. This disempowerment makes his encounters more memorable than traditional boss fights would be. Fifth, physical design should communicate function without explanation. Pyramid Head's helmet, his blade, his apron, his movements, every element visually communicates that he's dangerous, strong, inhuman. Players understand his threat before any game mechanics confirm it. Effective antagonist design should be readable through silhouette and animation, requiring minimal exposition. Sixth, let context determine whether violence is the solution. Most game antagonists exist to be defeated through combat. Pyramid Head demonstrates that sometimes understanding is victory. The game could have ended with a traditional boss fight, two pyramid heads with health bars, dodge patterns, weak points. Instead, victory comes through James speaking words of acceptance. This surprise inversion creates more lasting impact than standard combat would achieve. Seventh, symbolic function can outweigh personality. Pyramid Head has zero personality, no dialogue, no expressions, no quirks or mannerisms beyond his distinctive walk. Yet he's more memorable than many antagonists, with elaborate characterization. His complete lack of personality makes him a blank screen for projection, allowing players to impose their own interpretations. Sometimes being a pure symbol is more powerful than being a developed character. Eighth, appearance frequency matters. Pyramid Head appears sparingly, perhaps 6 or 7 times across a 20-hour game. Each appearance feels significant because he's not omnipresent. Overusing an antagonist reduces their impact through familiarity. Careful pacing maintains tension and ensures each encounter carries weight. These principles don't guarantee success. Creating an antagonist as culturally impactful as Pyramid Head requires not just solid design principles, but also fortunate timing, resonant themes, and execution that balances dozens of variables. Silent Hill 2 succeeded partially because it arrived at the right cultural moment, early 3D gaming when technology enabled new forms of horror before the market became saturated with psychological horror games. But the principles remain valuable even if replicating Pyramid Head's specific success proves impossible. Horror creators examining what makes antagonists memorable will find that restriction, ambiguity, and symbolic function consistently outperform exposition, elaboration, and combat prowess. The scariest villains often aren't the ones who give the longest monologues or have the most elaborate backstories. They're the ones who remain unknowable, who violate our expectations, who represent something deeper than simple physical threat. Conclusion: the executioner we needed. Pyramid Head works because he's exactly what James Sunderland needed to confront his guilt, no more, no less. He doesn't exist to be a universally terrifying figure. He exists to terrify James specifically, to force confrontation with shame and violence that James would otherwise avoid. This specificity paradoxically makes him more relatable rather than less. Everyone carries guilt about something. Everyone has aspects of themselves they'd rather not examine. Everyone has created internal executioners to punish themselves for real or imagined sins. The genius of Silent Hill 2's design is making this internal process external and interactive. Players experience James's psychological journey through gameplay rather than cutscenes. They feel the helplessness of encountering Pyramid Head. They experience the frustration of failing to save Maria repeatedly. They participate in James's eventual acceptance by witnessing Pyramid Head's self-destruction. The game doesn't tell you how James feels, it makes you feel it directly. This emotional directness is what elevates Pyramid Head beyond clever design into genuine art. He's not just a well-designed video game enemy. He's a manifestation of human guilt and the desire for punishment made tangible and navigable. Walking through those apartment corridors while the radio crackles, knowing Pyramid Head is nearby, creates an emotional state that persists beyond the game. You remember that fear, that tension, that relief when he finally leaves. The debate over whether Pyramid Head should appear in other Silent Hill games or media ultimately misses the point. He belongs to James's story. His meaning derives from that specific context. Transplanting him elsewhere makes him a costume rather than a character, an aesthetic choice rather than a narrative necessity. The better question is why other Silent Hill games haven't created equivalently powerful manifestations unique to their protagonists. What does it say about creative confidence that subsequent games reach for Pyramid Head's recognizable silhouette rather than trusting their own symbolic systems? Future horror games will continue featuring unkillable pursuers, psychological manifestations, and antagonists that serve symbolic functions. Some will succeed brilliantly, creating new icons as memorable as Pyramid Head. Others will fall short, creating forgettable enemies that feel like Pyramid Head clones without understanding what made the original work. The difference will come down to whether creators understand that effective horror antagonists aren't about elaborate designs or complex backstories. They're about creating experiences that force protagonists and players to confront uncomfortable truths. Silent Hill 2 created something remarkable, a villain who wins by losing, who terrorizes through restraint, who serves the protagonist's growth despite being the antagonist. Pyramid Head isn't defeated because he was never truly the enemy. The enemy was James's denial, his inability to accept what he'd done and who he'd become. Pyramid Head was the tool that broke through that denial, brutal but necessary, terrifying but ultimately therapeutic. That triangular helmet will continue appearing in cosplay galleries and fan art showcases. The image is too striking, too immediately recognizable to fade from cultural memory. But the true legacy of Pyramid Head isn't his visual design. It's the demonstration that video game antagonists can be more than obstacles to overcome. They can be mirrors, teachers, manifestations of internal truth that must be confronted before growth becomes possible. The executioner arrived because punishment was necessary. He departed because the sentence was served. What remains is James, alone with his guilt, finally ready to carry it consciously, rather than projecting it onto external monsters. That's the horror Silent Hill 2 truly delivers. Not jump scares or gore, but the realization that the scariest monsters are the ones we create ourselves, and defeating them requires becoming someone new.